Welcome to another episode of In Conversation. This is a series I do where I talk with writers from all different sections of traditional publishing and points in their journey, and we discuss a topic. And today I'm here with Elora Cook, and we are talking all about new ideas and how to come up with them and strategies and all of that. So I will let Elora introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Elora, and I'm a YA writer based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm represented by Sabrina Tates at William Morris Endeavour, and I write books about fiery girls and the soft-hearted boys that adore them. And my current story, the one that I signed with Sabrina with, is a mafia YA. It's Gossip Girl meets The Sopranos, and it's if Blair Waldorf was a mafia boss's daughter and her family was murdered by a mysterious gang.
Amazing. What was the inspiration for your current work in progress?
My inspiration for my current whip, my current whip is it's a celebrity romance YA story. It's not a rom-com, because I like writing about angst, so there's less comedy, more angst. Yeah. And I got the inspiration for it a while back, actually, and I had tucked the idea away for future use, and now I'm finally getting a chance to write about it. And I got the inspiration for it from movies and just wanting to write about like a celebrity style story, because I always find those fascinating, and I love romance in YA. Like growing up when I was a kid and a teen, like when I started reading those books, I found so much like interest, and I would just be so engrossed in it. Didn't even have to be exactly about a romance. Like it could just be like a subplot, but I was always so into it and just wanted to know, like, oh my gosh, are they going to get together or are they not? And then afterwards when I got together, I was like, okay, I'm done. It's only like leading up to that I'm like, oh, I'm really into this. Don't tell my boyfriend that. But that's where I've got inspiration to write this one. I just always really wanted to write one like this. I always loved the books by Jenny Han growing up. The not the To All the Boys, but the Summer I Turned Pretty series. That's where I feel like I got my first initial interest in those kind of books, like for YA, and that's where I've gone from there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way about, like, I read a book about romance and the second they get together, I'm like done forever. And I can't read any other books because I haven't watched the second To All the Boys movie yet, because I can't watch when they like break up and get back together. It's like too stressful for me.
Yeah. And I definitely have feelings about that whole love triangle. John Ambrose forever. That's just all I'm gonna say about that.
Right there. Yeah, exactly. And that's really cool. And so many like ideas, especially like rom-com ones, even though not why romance elements, I feel like coming from movies is so natural because there's so many like romantic comedies or like movies that have like big romance elements. Like when you think about young adult books and like how many ones like have romance in them, it like kind of mirrors movies in that way. So that's really cool. I like that you have like a distinct inspiration, like this is from movies. I am bad because I always forget half the time where I get inspiration for my works in progress. So like my haunted house book that I'm working on, not currently, but I work on it on and off. I cannot for the life of me remember the inspiration for that, but I do remember like follow-up conversations that I have about it. Like I talked with Kes, who is one of our other writer friends from Toronto, and I talked with her about like really wanting to write a horror, and that's when I started to kind of think about that more and think about haunted houses. But I also think about movies, like all the horrors that I watched and the sort of things that I liked from them, and a lot of it was I really like haunted horrors, like house stories, like Haunting Hill House and like Amityville Horror and like all those ones with haunted houses. So I knew I kind of wanted to write a haunted house book, but I can't like point to anything distinct about it. Where do you usually find inspiration for your new ideas?
Kind of like how a lot of writers do, movies, TV shows, other books, and just life in general. I don't try to force new ideas. Like I let them simmer and come to me. You never really know where you're going to find a new idea, which is actually kind of exciting in certain ways because you never know when because I see them as like they come to me. Like I don't really get a choice in which ones I get to write about and get to know about, because it's like they're just like out there flying in the world, and then if they come to you, it's like, oh, this is your story to write, and see where it goes. Which maybe that's a little strange to some people, but that's just how I see it. Yeah, so that's where I find it like externally, but I also love songs and music. That really is a huge part of my my inspiration and how I find new ideas. A song could just completely create a new book idea for me, or it could help build upon like a little budding idea I have. And then I go from there because I really think visually. So hearing songs in my ears from my music that like inspires like a scene or a vibe or feeling really helps to to really bring it about and to really like create this or build upon this idea that's already like slowly being formed in my mind. When I got my inspiration for my Mafia book, and I created it pretty quickly, like I wrote it pretty quickly, but I realized that a lot of that inspiration that I got came from years of consuming other forms of media. And like, for example, there's this movie with Robert De Niro called The Family. It's R-rated like comedy. It's like mafia, of course. Of course, Robert De Niro's in it. But I remember watching it with my family years ago, and I hated it. It's like, okay, that sounds like terrible, but I actually hated it because it was like super cringy and very violent, and it wasn't very comedic, to be quite honest. But it stuck with me. And when I started writing my Mafia book years later, I realized there was a scene in the beginning of the movie that really orchestrated a lot of my book, where a family is sitting at their dinner table and they're just eating, like the mom, the dad, and the kids, and then they get all murdered, like shot, like all these bullets start going through their walls, and then they all die, and it was very like awful. And I was like, I remember when I sat there and watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the kids are getting murdered, like this is like the worst. How can this be happening? And then years later, when I was writing my book, and that a scene like that plays out, it's a big part of my plot. I remember thinking, oh, hey, you know what? That actually, like, let's go off of those emotions and how I felt, and to go into my main character Tasha when she witnesses the same thing happen to her family. And who would have thought? Like, I never would have thought that this random movie I watched would play such a big role later. So you never know, like, you never know where you're going to find inspiration, and you just or if you might be like, this is an awful movie, like back in 2013 or whatever, but then years later it'll still stay with you, and then it could create a new idea that you never would have expected.
Yeah. And probably stayed with you because it was so awful and you didn't like it so much that you remembered it.
Yes.
And I feel like sometimes, like, movies that you watch that you don't like, you think in your head, you're like, how could I have done this better for myself? How could I have done this in a way that I would have actually liked this? And like transform it in your head, that kind of like what if idea where you think, well, what if it had been done this way? So I actually really agree with you in like, that's how I get a lot of my ideas, is that they just kind of come and decide that that's a story that I'm going to write. A lot of times because they're the most persistent ideas, they come up the most, and I think about them the most, and they like occupy more and more of my headspace until I'm like, okay, well, I guess I have to flesh out this idea, because there's a lot of ideas that I write down just as they come to me. My inspiration is like weird. I sometimes get inspiration from movies, like the same what if feeling, where I'll watch something and I'll be like, well, what if it was done this way? And that'll be my idea. But a lot of the times they're extremely random. They don't really have anything to do with what I was doing at the time. I got an idea for another horror about girls on an island, not a Wilder Girls island, more of a tropical island, I guess. Anyway, but that idea came from nothing. I wasn't watching anything about an island. I wasn't thinking about anything like that. It just kind of came from nowhere, but it was the most persistent idea. So then I ended up writing more about it. And I also liked what you said about music, like heightening your idea that you already have and adding layers to it, because I actually also do a really similar thing.
Oh yeah.
We're so similar now.
I didn't know it.
My haunted house book, I was listening to like a Hosier song. I won't say which one because it gives away the title and I'm trying to keep it secret, but you can guess on your own. But I was listening to a Hosier song and he like mentioned something and I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And I looked it up and it fit so perfectly into the imagery of the haunted house book, and I ended up naming the book after the song. I've switched it slightly now, but that was basically like, and then more scenes piled on after listening to that song and like learning more about that term, and then it ended up being so much more fleshed out than the initial idea I had. Was just like, I want to do a haunted house book.
Yeah, it's amazing what music can do for your mind and your creativity.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't even like listening to music when I write, so it's surprising to me, especially.
Really, because I have to listen to music when I write, or otherwise I'm just staring. I'm just like, what do I? And I get distracted by everything around me. Yeah.
No, I can't listen to. I need complete silence. Like I can't remember what that movie is where he's like, I need complete and utter silence to do this.
I don't, yeah, I can't, like, I know so many writers are like that, but I cannot relate to that. That's why I can't work in, well, it's not really the exact same, but like I can't work in cafes either, even though those are very loud, but just because I get so distracted by looking around at everybody. Yeah. And then also when I listen to music, this is kind of embarrassing, but like, if I'm really into like a song, I'll be like, yeah, like, just get it. And I can't do that in public. So if I try to do that in public, it'll be like, don't start grooving to the beat, Elora. That's so, but it's probably not helpful for, other people. If they see me just grooving, they'll be like, "What are you doing, like, lady?"
They'll also be distracted by you.
Yeah, we'll all be distracted by me. Yeah.
What's an example of a story idea that you had that just didn't work long term, and why do you think it didn't work?
I do have an example. It's another YA. This one I was thinking about it a lot. Like I was doing the exact same thing that I said before that I do, where, I was thinking about it and I was like letting it grow. I had a music playlist for it. It was really, really forming in my mind. And then I went down, I didn't plot it out first though. I probably should have done that. But I sat down to start writing just like 1 or 2 chapters just to see like how the voice was, how the character was, and the story, where it would go. And I think I got like 2 or 3 chapters in, and it was fine. Like I liked it. I still think that the story could go somewhere, but I just didn't my intuition was telling me this is not a book that you need to be writing right now, because actually at the time when I was starting to think about it and was thinking, okay, I'm gonna write this book next, because at that point I was querying my second book, and it was just doing its thing, but I was trying to think, okay, what am I gonna write next? But at the time when I was working on this other book, which I should say was a contemporary fantasy, it was about like a girl who had lost her boyfriend, and she had like contemporary fantasy elements. So because I thought that's I thought that's the genre I wanted to write in. I still kind of do sometimes, but at the time, this mafia book was also kind of vying for my attention. And when the sad boyfriend book wasn't really like sticking, like at the time, I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna put this one away for a while, and like not like get rid of it completely, but just shelve it for now, and just write this mafia book because it's really asking for my attention, like demanding my attention. And it obviously worked out really well. That's how I got my agent. I know one day I'll probably go back to it because I still think it has legs to stand on. I didn't shelve it because it was a bad book idea, it was just because I wasn't really feeling it at the time. But for now, I'm focusing on, more fun, like happy, or not happy per se, but fun, interesting books in a like strictly contemporary setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes that's just the way, one idea is the best idea for you at that time because it's way more prevalent. It's bugging you way more than whatever it is that you're working on, which is like shiny new idea syndrome is a thing. And sometimes you just get distracted from something because it's new, but sometimes you get distracted by something because it's really just like the better book for you to write at that time. For my example, I can't even remember what age I was. I must have been teenaged, but I think this was I think this was after I had written my very first book, which was bad, and like before I had written my second book. But essentially the origin story of it is I watched Knowing, which is a lesser known movie, but it stars Nick Cage. All the critics thought it was a terrible movie. I'm sure if I watched it back now, I would probably agree with them. But at the time, I watched it and I thought it was amazing. And at the end, I'm going to spoil it for you. So sorry if you were going to watch it. At the end, they like drop all the children in the world off on this like new planet away from Earth because Earth is like a trash fire. So the aliens are like good aliens, even though they thought they were bad the whole time. So they drop them off on this planet, and the planet's got like blue grass and stuff, and there's like this gigantic like purple tree, and they walk off towards it, and then the movie ends, which is probably why critics didn't like it. But for whatever reason, I was so like blown away by this and so inspired. And I was like, I got to write the story of what happens after these children are on this planet. So I sat down, and in one day I wrote 14,000 words of this book, just like off of nothing, wow. Off of the power of Nick Cage. And I wrote that much, and then I was so tired, so I just left it. And then I thought about it, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this, because I hadn't planned anything, because I just sat down purely on inspiration. And by then I hadn't learned about things like Save the Cat or anything like that. Right. I didn't know how to like plot coherently. I just kind of sat down and wrote stuff. So that was all I'd done. And then when I went back to look at it, I was like, this is such a mess. I was like, I don't know where to go with this random fever dream story.
But it's amazing you did 14,000 words. I've never done that.
I've never done it again. I don't think I will do it again. I don't even think I can do 10,000 words. I don't know what possessed me. I was very inspired by the movie that nobody liked. Yeah, and it didn't have any legs after that. And I think mostly it was because I hadn't planned anything and I had no idea what was happening. Also, it was like a high science fiction because they were in a completely brand new world, and they were human children, but they were like 8 or something to start off with, and then they like grew up to like 14, 15. And so I didn't know how much they would know. There was just too much world building, and I got overwhelmed by it. And then I just had to put it aside. And then later I think about it and I'm like, it's not a good book. So I
think we've all written one of those types of books though. So
yeah,
you're not alone.
Where you look back at it and you're like, this is bad. I know it was good, but this was bad.
Yeah, like my 14-year-old book that I wrote like had a reference to Twilight with Robert Pattinson, and where I said something like along the lines of how the love interest, he had like a similar face to Robert Pattinson. Like so cringy.
Don't even feel, because my very first book that I wrote, it was a werewolf book, and it was Stephenie Meyer werewolf ripoff. I just fully ripped off what her werewolves looked like. And then I just added little extra details to them. So I had also recently read Twilight, and at least New Moon by that time. So the same thing, and it's not good.
Yes. To be like a young teenager again with those like budding new ideas that are just ripoffs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was because I feel like Twilight was the first like solidly young adult book that I had
Yeah.
read at the time. And like, I think my mom had been like, oh, you should read Anne Rice. And I was like, I don't want to, because they were like thick looking books and the covers weren't pretty because completely shallow child. And I was like, I don't want to read Anne Rice. And then Twilight came up and I was like, oh, I was like, these are like vampires, but they're like my age. So I'll read this for sure. And then after that, there were like more books that I'd read. I don't know. I read so many. I think of like Teens Today, and I would just like go in the library and I'd look at covers and I'd just pick out books purely from cover.
Same. 100%.
That's it for this episode of In Conversation, talking all about how to come up with and vet new book ideas. Thank you so much to Elora for joining me on this. You can find all her socials and information down below. I will link it so that you can check her out, and you should definitely follow her. And yes, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up.
Yes.
Please subscribe below if you haven't subscribed already. I do this In Conversation series. I also do a bunch of other videos talking about my experiences in traditional publishing and my journey to becoming a traditionally published author, etc. And so subscribe if you want to see more of those. And if you have any questions for either of us, you can feel free to put them in the comments. This is called In Conversation. It is a conversation. So please let us know, like, how do you come up with your book ideas? How do you vet new ideas? How do you decide whether an idea is going to go forward into a full book? We'd love to hear from you. So post that below in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Liselle.
Yes. Thank you for being here.